Welcome to the Pretty Tough Room podcast. I'm your host, Sadell P. And today I want to talk to you about produce and produce. I know that sounds like an oxymoron a little bit, but produce and produce. And it just dropped on my spirit about an hour ago. And I'm just thinking, those words are spelled the same, but they have different meanings. And I think with respect to that word, it keeps reminding me of harvest, like planting and harvesting. And when it came to me, produce and produce, I started doing some research when I got home because it dropped on my spirit while I was having my self-care moment. And a few things that I was talking about with some people um, now seems like it's tying into produce and produce. So today I just kind of want to drop a few little things, on you guys to let you know, like just where my mind was. I know that it was the spirit that gave it to me. And so I wanted to share that with you today. When I thought about produce and produce, they're both spelled the same, right? So PRODUCE, produce and produce. So I remember when I was younger in school, there was a word for, words that are spelled the same but have different meanings. And I couldn't remember, but I knew it was a word I used to like when I was in school. And so it's homographs. So homographs are words that sound alike but have different meanings. So I looked up produce, just the one word, like because they're both spelled the same. So I just typed in produce. And the first definition that came up in the dictionary was that it was a verb. The first definition is a verb. And it had to make or manufacture from components or raw material. The second definition was also a verb, and it was to cause a particular result or situation to happen or come into existence. And then the third definition is a noun, and it said things that have been produced or grown, especially by farming. So then that third definition made me think of produce. So we pronounce it differently too. So not only are they spelled the same, but they are pronounced different and have different meanings. So to produce would be the two aforementioned definitions that I just said: make or manufacture or cause a particular result. And produce is things that have been produced or grown, especially by farming. So then I kept playing around with it: produce and produce, produce and produce. And a scripture came to mind because with that word produce and produce, I started thinking about reaping and sowing. And it just blew my mind because I'm like, I know that God is telling me in this time to be watchful about, things that I speak in the atmosphere because, words give life. And so if I speak a certain thing, it can produce other things to happen in the atmosphere. So Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 in the Message Bible reads, "Don't be misled. No one makes a fool of God. What a person plants, he will harvest." And so then I'm thinking, okay, planting, produce, vegetables, fruit, things like that. So things, it's coming in pieces, but it started making sense to me. And I'm just like, okay, God, what are you trying to say to me? And I know it's for me too. Most things that I get in my spirit or that I read and study, I know I make sure that I get something out of it, but oftentimes it's for someone else. And so I know someone who is dealing with a situation, with their child, and produce and produce, it kept coming up. And then I'm thinking with their situation with their child, I started thinking then about Proverbs 22:6, where it says, point your kids in the right direction. And then when they are old, they won't be lost. That's also the Message version. Point your kids in the right direction. When they're old, they won't be lost. Growing. I'm thinking of with respect to point your kids as your children are growing up, the things that you teach them, the things that you do around them, because we are all products of our environment, right? So wherever we are and where we spend the most time, we'll operate in that manner, in that environment, and we pick up things too that come from that. So reaping and sowing, produce and produce, train up a child. It's all about growth. And I'm thinking, how do things grow, right? They grow when you plant. You have to plant and water in order for things to grow. So for this particular person and their child who was dealing, who's dealing with some things with respect to their child, we've been celebrating Mother's Day and Father's Day and how great moms are, and the things that they do and they give up and to raise their children, and the same for fathers. And then I think about our children and how the world today is not so kind, and our children are growing up in atmospheres and environments that isn't conducive to their growth. And so the things that are getting planted in our children, they're being trained up in those types of ways, and so they're growing in that aspect. And if the Bible is telling us that the way we direct our children is the way that they're going to grow up when they get older, then we ought to be mindful of, the environments that we allow our children to be in, or that we place our children into. So since we are products of our environment, we need to make sure that there are healthy and positive things, around us when we are raising our children, so that they can get those type of positive things instilled in them. And then when they get older, into from youth to young adults to adults, then there are certain values and things that they have instilled in them that they'll be able to go back to, or because it's instilled in them, it'll just come naturally for them to operate and move in those things. So I wanted to be a little bit transparent about the way that we kind of, we raise our children, because our children are our future. Whitney told us that a long time ago. We were once children. And so when I think about the way that I raised my children, it wasn't always perfect. Like, my children seen a lot of things that they shouldn't have seen. They seen a lot of the real street life, the real hood stuff that Pittsburgh had to offer, because I lived in environments that, you know, we couldn't help but to move around in, and we had to adapt to the environments we were in. So they seen a lot of things, and so when they would do certain things that I didn't like, because I was a young mother, and not mindful of the environments and things that my children were in, and I would get upset when they would like act a certain way, or be cussing up a storm, or moving a certain way. And because I'm the adult, I'm just like, you need to stop acting this way, or you need to stop doing this that way. You're not being kind, or you're being rude, but not taking into consideration that the environment that they were in caused them to operate in that. And I think a lot of times, as as a young mom, I didn't know no better either, because of the environment that I grew up in. So it was a norm for me, which became a norm for my children, and I planted those types of seeds into my children. So when they got older into young adults, when I didn't want them doing certain things, it was very difficult to try to help them change those behaviors, because those seeds were planted in them, and it grew, and then they started moving and operating in those things. So we got to be careful, with our children, and how they're growing up in the places, being involved in the schools that they're in, making sure and holding teachers accountable for the type of materials that they are teaching our kids, and the morals and values that they get when they're in school, and with respect to us taking responsibility, that, when we young, we hanging out around the hot spots, and we take our kids with us because we feel like, then we run around and say like, well, I raised my kids, I took them everywhere I went. And yeah, you did that. And look at the type of behaviors that your children ended up, picking up because you did those things. And if I could go back and do it differently with the children that I raised, knowing what I know now, I would have been more cautious of the type of environment that they grew up in. I would have been making sure that I lived in neighborhoods when I could help it, because most times, we can't help it. It's the economy or, something like that. We have to live in certain environments, but you can create an environment inside of another environment. So what I would have done differently is, okay, if I had to live in the projects, then the environment inside the home of the project could have been different. I could have taken my children into other parts of the neighborhoods, in Pittsburgh, and let them experience other things other than being okay with where I'm at, complaining about it, but not trying to do nothing different and just throwing my hands up and saying, okay, well, this is it. I just have to conform, if you will, and make it do what it do. And it's gonna make my kids tough, and they're gonna be able to, defend themselves. And looking back, they are able to defend themselves. It did grow them up to be, stronger individuals, like with tougher skin. But it also made them sort of aggressive in nature, too. And when you are raising children, there's we got to be careful with making it well rounded. Okay, so we might live in the hood, so you see little things and it might teach you how to be a little tough. But then I also want you to be book smart. I want you to go to school, and I want you to not operate in the realm that you do in the hood when you're in school. I want, when you're around adults, to be respectful and things like that. One of the things that my friend was dealing with was that his child, kind of feels it knows too much. You know what I mean? And we got to be careful with sharing a lot of things with our children too. Like, I know for me, my kids knew about credit, like bad credit and shut off notices when we got them, because I felt like, I was a young mom, and I used to be like, well, they growing up with me. They need to know that everything ain't peaches and cream around here, that you got to fight for this and that. Not understanding that sometimes when we plant those types of things into our children, when we expose them to those types of things, that plants anxiety, on our kids, and it puts pressures on our children that they shouldn't have in their youthful years, or in their teens, or even as pre-adults. There is a way that we can teach them how to manage money, how to budget. And I know some people might say, well, I didn't know how to do that, so I just did it in the realm that I learned how to do it. And I understand that, because that was me. I was the one who thought, well, I turned out okay, so they'll be fine. But there were times where I would sit back and be like, wow, I really wish I would have had another way to show my daughters, how not to be aggressive, because they act just like their mom. So when we don't get our way, we tend to be aggressive. All of my daughters are like that. My boys are very protective, and they're aggressive in nature too. But I know that it's because of the seed that I planted, because of the environment that they were in, the seed that was planted, it produced certain qualities of my children, and they grew up and started operating in that way. So when the word produce and produce came up, and I'm thinking planting and harvesting, my children, certain things were planted into my children, and it harvested in them too later in life. So we got to be careful about how we make sure that how we raise our children, the environments that our children grow up, the things that we share with our children. You can be a friend to your child. And I'm a firm believer that it's okay to be a friend with your child, but to a certain extent. They don't need to know all of what's going on, because we can make them feel responsible, or we can make them feel, less than, because they can't help. And we should be keeping certain things to ourselves. Go find you a friend that's your age, or a family member that you can vent to, but telling our children that, things aren't right. And on top of the fact that they can see that we are anxious and we are upset and we are stressed or depressed, putting that on the kid, it can make them grow up to be bitter and resentful and unforgiving. And we don't want our kids to operate that. Proverbs 22:6 says that point our kids in the right direction so that when they're old, they won't be lost. Point them in the right direction, not in just any direction. And what is the right direction? So it is how do you want your child to be as an adult? I don't think any parent is sit around and say that they want their kid to be the hardest kid in the world and be mean and, nasty to people. The right direction. You want your child to be liked. You want your child to be respectful. You want your child to be knowledgeable about life and how to maneuver. Nowadays, you want your child to budget. You want them to go to school and get a good education. You want them to grow up and be responsible parents and, things like that. And it also was reminding me of, I remember when I'm talking about products of the environment, a few years ago, I had bought about a half a dozen of piranhas, right? I had a really, really big tank and I bought piranhas. I don't know why. I think those was in the years like I just was being hood. Like, and my kids was young and I wanted, piranhas, and they had the jagged teeth and I really wanted to just see them in their habitat. But we bought them and they were really small. They were baby fishes, right? We bought 6 of them. So as time progressed, they started getting older, getting bigger, and we were feeding them goldfish. I would love to go to the fish store and buy goldfish and watch them eat the fish because it was just fun. Like, wow, you stand there and watch them, eat the fish. And one day, me and my kids were looking at them eat the fish that we bought, and we noticed like one of the fish had like missing pieces on his body, like the fins had teeth marks, and like by the stomach area, like the side of it had little missing chunks. And I'm like, well, why is this one fish missing pieces and all the rest of them aren't? They all look the same. They were the same color and everything. So I called the pet store because I'm like, something's not right. This one fish started to look different, like look the same but look different. And I'm like, this it's the only one that has bite marks. No other fish has bite marks. And they're asking me to, describe the fish. And I was describing, they asked me to bring it in. So when I took the one fish in there, they ended up telling me like, "Man, we're so sorry. We sold you a pacu." And I'm like, "Well, what's the pacu?" Now, mind you, piranhas eat meat. So we're putting goldfish in the fish tank, and pacus eat like nuts and like pellets and things like that. But because we bought all the fish together as babies, the pacu grew up like the piranhas because of the environment it was in. So even the face of the pacu stretched out and came up over. You know how piranhas jaw lines at the bottom kind of come out like this because the teeth come up. The pacu looked like the piranhas. The pacu was eating the meat. I guess it felt like, well, I don't really eat meat, but if I want to eat, I better eat this meat. So, and they were like, so I'm like, what we going to do? I know I can't get another piranha and put it in the tank because one that's too small, the fish that I have at home would eat it. And the one that's too big might eat the fish that's at home. So they were like, we're going to refund you some money for, the cost of one piranha, and then give you like a certificate for, the mix up. So I gave them the pacu. They called me a few days later and they were like, hey, are you the person that brought the pacu in that grew up with the piranhas? And I said, yeah. And the lady was like, I just had to call you because we put the pacu in the tank with the other pacus. First of all, it was 2 sizes bigger than the other pacus because it had been eating meat. And second of all, it was aggressive. So now their tank full of pacus had bite marks because the pacu had adapted to the environment of the piranhas. And when it got around its kind, it still was operating in the environment that it used to be in. And so that just reminded me of how important it is to be mindful of our environment and be mindful of the seeds that we plant, because they will harvest. So, what I wanted to bring to you today was just the fact that we need to be careful of the things that we speak out of our mouths, because that is planting. We plant things in the atmosphere, and things that we speak will be harvested and manifested. We need to be mindful of things we plant with respect to our children, what we're putting in their minds, the way we speak to them, the environments that they grow up in. We need to be mindful of planting the seeds in our marriages, in our relationships, in our jobs, and things like that, because the Bible does say there's a time for everything, but that seed time and that harvest time, that's real. Reaping what you sow, that's real. And so be intentional. Y'all know I like that word. Intentional is my word. Be intentional about what you say to other people, what you say to your children, how you raise your children. Producing is inevitable for everyone in our lives. We're going to produce. How and what we produce depends on what we plant. So be encouraged today to be mindful of what you plant, knowing that what you plant will manifest. And so if you don't want to manifest or to reap negative things or hurtful things, then make sure that you're planting positive things and things that'll help you grow in a positive way. Thank you for joining me tonight. Remember, tough times never last, but tough people do.